Hey everybody, Psychosaurus is here, and welcome to, well, not necessarily Age of Empires Online, but another one of these talking videos. And since the winter event has come and we had some new gear and some updated gear, I think it's time we took a look at those light spear and the sword of the piercing frost items. So we have some idea how good these items now. Let's start with the light speed of the piercing frost. And just so you know, ignore armor is a little bit complicated because it is a stat that can be described as something that can be very good, but at the same time it can be something that is useless. And it obviously depends on one thing, what you're fighting against and how much armor it has. That's basically it. So if the enemy unit has 0 armor, well, guess what? Ignore armor is completely useless. But if they have very high armor, for example, you're using pierce damage against enemy siege, and siege usually has 0.85 damage reduction from pierce damage, then the ignore armor is gonna be very good against the siege. So yeah, very dependent stat. So let's start with the light speed, and this item was buffed, and if I remember correctly, this was like 6% and this was like 10% ignore armor, something around that. Light spear, I don't remember exactly. Again, I did not check it out myself, so if you want to check it out, just search for my last year winter event videos and you will find it there. Maybe, I think I was talking about it like in the first video when the winter event became available, but I'm not sure right now. But if I remember correctly, I said that this light spear, to actually be useful, the enemy would need a lot of armor, and I think even the 3rd tier would be like, yeah, this is where it becomes somewhat good, but it's like comparable to some other items, barely. So yeah, I don't think it was like good enough for you to, like, let's say you need to pick it. Nada, the enemy would need a lot of armor before. But with the buff, let's just say 30% ignore armor is a lot. Like, I feel like 20% is already really good, but like moving it to 30% is a lot. And you have to remember, sword is like at a similar position, but the sword has like 7% more damage while having 10% less ignore armor. And I'll be honest, I feel like that sword is really strong for what it does, and I have already tested it on a couple units, and I feel like, yeah, it's a very good weapon, and we will see later why. But I haven't tried the light speed yet, and this is where I want to see the numbers, how good they are, because 37.2 damage, that's like similar to the level of the set's light speed, but you can see, like, if we compare the piercing frost with the summer spear, yeah, health is much lower, damage is slightly lower, and then it's like 30% versus 4% movement speed, or I should say 30% ignore armor. So yeah, relatively these items, like, it looks like the set's light spear is better from the beginning, which is gonna be true. If you're fighting something that has no armor, then the set's light speed is definitely gonna be better. But you have to remember that the set's light speed is more about the health, so you make your units tanky. This is more about the offense. So let's do the calculations now. So as you know, usually the units have 0 armor, and then they go like, they get the first upgrade, which is 1/6 less, then they get the second upgrade, which is gonna be like 30% less, and then the third is about 40%. Look, it's a little bit more, but I'm just gonna use the rounded values. You just have to remember it's gonna be slightly better, but I think it's gonna be good enough for the comparison. And then obviously we have units that start with some base armor, which is usually 0.30. And then some more armored units that have like 0.50. In some cases you find even like numbers like 0.20, 0.40. But I'm not really gonna consider them. I think these three plus like the 0.50 is gonna be ideal for the showcase, because let's just say anything above the 0.50, then Igno armor is just gonna be great. And you can already tell, because at 0.50 the Igno armor becomes equal to the damage. So if you fight something like Legionary, that's a lot of damage already. You can tell it. It's like suddenly more than 70% extra damage there. But I'm getting ahead. Let's start with the first upgrade tier. Now, if you have watched my previous videos, you might know how the calculations work. If you haven't, I recommend checking them out. To put it simply, we need to take the armor over the damage taken, and this is gonna be the number we will multiply the armor to get the real damage value we're getting from it. So in case of the first tier, it's gonna be 1/5, so we can already tell it's gonna be 6%. Now we have the damage, so 1.37, 21. We multiply that, and you can tell at first tier we have 45%, 0.44. Well, this is already really good, because that's almost 6% above the set slide speed. If we compare it to some nice speed, I think this is the ideal one, because you can already tell it's better than the epic version suddenly. And first upgrades are not like super rare, okay? They are very common to see in quests, especially legendary quests. So you can tell at first upgrade it's already better than its epic counterpart, which if we compare it without upgrade, obviously this is weaker in damage, slightly better with health. But once the enemy gets the first tier, hey, it's already better. So you can already tell, I think this is ideal comparison, that the spear actually kind of deserves to be at the legendary rarity. So already with the first upgrade, pretty good spear. If I compare it to some other spears, these are more offensive spears, so you can tell that the damages are gonna be higher, but you have to remember you're also getting health as well. So if we take this number of damage, this amount of health, so I would say it's pretty comparable to these damage spears already, so that's already pretty good. Now here depends how much you value movement speed. This is really good actually to compare. The light speed of the king, because this is very comparable damage, right? I mean, the damage can go higher, but it's already very comparable. Now the question here would be, do you prefer the health or the higher armor against cavalry with some armor against infantry? So that would be questionable. Which one would you prefer? But it is pretty much the same spear, right? At this point, the piercing frost with the light speed of the king is very comparable and very similar values. Now obviously Set's light speed is gonna be more defensive at this point with some extra movement speed, so Set's light speed, we can start ignoring it because it's doing its own thing, while the light speed is going more offensive way. And the Zahak's light speed, I would say Zahak's is still gonna be better here, because health regen is very nice, plus you have much higher damage, so it's still gonna be better. And then we have the epic ones. I'm not gonna go through those, but you can tell that with the first upgrades, yes, the light speed is already getting the value. So this buff definitely helped to reach its somewhat good potential with the first upgrade. I would say it's at a good level, although I would say maybe it's a little bit too strong already, but who knows, because now we have to clear this. We are going for the second tier of upgrades, or you might say also the base armor values for some units. So for example, if I put this light spear on something like hoplite and I'll fight the enemy spearman, I'm already getting the value. Or if they get the second tier of upgrades with no base armor, yes, about the same. So for that, we will have 3 divided by 7. Now we multiply this by our armor. So this is going to be 0.30. So effectively we are getting almost 13% damage. I hope I did this right. I feel like it's a little bit lower than it should be, but I guess it's correct. So we have this. Now we add the 1. And then we multiply the damage. Okay. 3721. And now we have this value. So this is the second tier or the base 0.30 armor. I mean, it's gonna be slightly better when you consider the armor attacks slightly higher, but you can already tell this is very good damage, because now suddenly it's higher than what the Zahak's light spear offers, and most of the damage light spears offers. Like, okay, if you get some better ones, it's pretty close, but you have to remember you're also getting health. So with the base general damage, I mean, this is very good comparison, right? Suddenly, hey, with the second tier, this is getting some real serious value suddenly. And I kind of like to see it this way, but I still would rather appreciate it if it was slightly lower than this. Because I feel like suddenly at second tier we are already beating a lot of the normal light spears in the matter of damage. So like second tier, and you have to remember, you will usually fight something like spearman, hypaspace, long swordsman. These kind of units that already have some base armor, so they are not, again, they are quite common to see in the quest. So you will get the values against them already. Against the rest, obviously depends on the armor attacks. But you can tell, this spear is gonna have some good value in the late game already. And so, let's check the last one, which is gonna be the 40% damage reduction. So 40 over 6, which means 2/3 as effective, so that's 1.20 times 1.32721. Okay, and this is like your last upgrade. In some cases it could be some units like, let's say, hoplites versus cataphracts. This is the damage you will have, and this is really huge. This is very huge amount of damage, like, oh boy, because now we are seriously beating every single one of those. Maybe some specific cases not, but most of the spears, yes. Basic Light Spear of Rostam, you're definitely beating this. Sargon, you're beating this, come on. You're definitely close enough with the damages here, but you have to remember, you are also getting the health, so stat-wise, you are better than these two light spears, no matter what. You're definitely better than Zahak's light spear. You're definitely better damage-wise than Seth's light spear, but like I said, ignore that, because that's more defensive one. So with the third tier, this is really a huge amount of damage. So if you ask me, the light spear of the piercing frost is very good. And just so we have it complete, let's compare the values when we fight something with 0.50 armor. That's huge, okay? That's huge. And this is not like super rare. If you are fighting like spearman, they have the second tier, this is where you get. And it goes even beyond that, you have to remember that. So, if I had to say, light spear is definitely good against the armored units. It's definitely getting the, I would say even with the first tier, they are already, the light spear is already at a really good spot, I would say. It's very comparable to the light spear, which is more defensive spear, but if we compare it to the general health, which works against every unit, every type of damage, then with the first tier, I would compare it to the light spear of the king. And once you get the second tier, it's, I mean, you are seriously comparing it with the rest of the spears. So once you see the second tier of upgrades, you see units like Hippaspis, Long Swordsman, Spearman. This light spear is gonna be good and better than practically any of these spears at that point. So if you ask me, this spear has become very powerful with all these upgrades, and I feel like it's a little bit overkill. I feel like it should be slightly weaker with the ignore armor portion. I'm glad that the damage got buffed, but I feel like the ignore armor part got like overshot a little bit. I think 10% extra is just a lot. I think it should go down to like, if not revert it back to 20%, I don't think that would be correct, because then I look at the sword and I'm like, okay, this sword has a lot more. But I also feel like the sword needs small nerf, to be honest. But okay, it is what it is. I would go down to like 25%. As you can see, this light spear is gonna become very powerful. So if you're playing those very challenging quests where the enemy gets a lot of armor, this spear is your friend, 100%. So if you can, try to get it during the winter event. Now, where would I put this spear? So we are talking about some units that could use some ignore armor when you're fighting the enemy. So obviously we need some armored units. But we need to remember, this spear can go on either infantry units or cavalry units. So it's gonna be infantry damage and cavalry damage types. Let's start with the cavalry. This is gonna be very easy. If you have cavalry damage, there's not that many units with cavalry armor. Every civ has at least one unit, and that's the spearman. So if you have a unit and you feel like you have issues with spearman, this can be good for you if you want to counter the spearman. But then it depends which civ you are playing against, because if you play against something like Persian, then Persians don't have any other cavalry armor unit, because their anti-cavalry unit after the spearmen are the mounted archers, and those have no armor. Same goes for the Babylonians. Now, for the other civs, we have Egyptians. They have camels, but camels have no cavalry armor. Same goes for the Celts with their horsemen. Those also don't have armor. So in those cases, I do not really recommend the Piercing Frost unless you're fighting like hordes of spearmen, and seriously like big huge hordes, and that's pretty much everything you're fighting against, which most likely is not happening. So for cavalry units, which includes, I think that's only Ekes. I guess that's only Ekes. I can think of, at least for now, I think that's only Ekes. So if you're putting this on Ekes, it can be good when you're fighting against the infantry. That can definitely help you there. Now, we also have some cavalry units that actually have, which would be Prodromos, Norse horsemen. And I'm thinking, so we have Greeks, Egyptians, Celts, Persians, Romans with their Gallic horsemen, and this is gonna be especially true. Then we have also the Ekes, they have some base cavalry armor. So that's 4 units. Babylonians, Norse with their horsemen. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So we have like 4 units with cavalry armor outside of spearmen rosters. So against those, I mean, the number one unit where I feel like this is gonna be really good is gonna be the Gallic Horseman, because that unit has 0.40 calorie armor. So if you wanna counter Gallic Horseman with your Ekes, hey, this is a very good spear for that. But then you have to remember, if you're playing as Romans, see, you also have your Gallic Horsemen, and you can go with the heavy piercing frost and yeah, put it there and just counter the Gallic Horseman with your own Gallic Horseman. So that is also alternative. So yeah, for calorie you can, but I wouldn't put it as my priority. Now for the infantry, that's actually going to be a lot more interesting, because you definitely can find at least 2 units with infantry armor in each civ. And one of them being the Spearman, which every civ has, and then you can find some other unit. So for example, in Greek army it would be like Hippaspist, which you can see like pretty much in all the quests. I think most of them have like the infantry there. Then you also have to remember there are Gastrafedes, but who cares about Gastrafedes? Honestly, they are not like the tankiest unit you find in the Greek army, so like who cares about them? Then we have Egyptians, which would be their infantry, so spearmen, axemen. You can see a lot of those. Then we have, oh right, I forgot the elephants. That's the one unit I forgot. I forgot the elephants. Those have the light spear. Okay, elephants, if you want to kill the enemy armies faster and they have a lot of armor attacks, that can be really good. Okay, I can say elephants for sure, because damage, I mean, can you imagine you fighting like, what is it, like the tier 4, you getting 60% extra damage for your elephants? Yes, that's huge, and you're not losing that much. Okay, elephants, those I forgot. But back to the infantry. So yeah, Egyptian infantry, Celtic infantry, obviously. Spearmen, long swordsmen, champions. Those have huge armor values. Then we have Persians, which would be Sparabaras, Immortals, Spearmen, Cataphracts. And I'm gonna end it here. You can see there's definitely a lot more units with infantry armor. So it obviously depends which unit you want to put this on, because when we consider infantry units, that includes hoplites, that includes the, I need to think, Egyptians have no infantry, Celts have no unit using light spear, Persians have Sparabaras, but Sparabaras are rather tank units, so you don't really want to use this spear. You either want to go with the light spear of the king, or the Set's light spear, or the Zahak's light spear. So Sparabaras, unless you're like seriously experimenting with Sparabaras, some weird damage builds, I don't really think you want to put it there. Same goes for the Babylonian shield bearers. Romans don't have the infantry using the light spear, and Norse have the Ulfhedins. So if I had to say, Hoplites and Ulfhedins are the ones where you might want to consider this light spear. I think Ulfhedins are more of a candidate, because if you decide to suddenly go with a lot of Ulfhedins, then yes, you can expect a lot of infantry units, and the 30% is just gonna be huge help. So I can definitely see this on Ulfhedins. Hoplites, if you're going more damage build, I would say, or more damage focused, then this can be also good. Unless you're going like more of a pure tank, then again it's gonna be Set, King, or Zahak. But yeah, you can tell there's like few units that can use this light spear, and it definitely, the buff definitely helped the light spear a lot. So definitely get it for the hoplites, Ulfhedins, and the war elephants. I can recommend those units. Otherwise, I would be careful. where I'm putting it, but yeah, you can put it on Ekes. Cannot forget the Ekes. But that's about it. I don't think there's anything else to be said about the light spear. You have few options. It's a very good spear once you get, I mean, once the enemy gets the first tier, it's already pretty good. Once it gets the second tier, it's very comparable to all of the remaining damage spears. And after that, it's just better. Okay, let's move on to the sword. And this one is actually gonna be very interesting. Now, where is it? There it is. Because as you can see, it's like 7% more damage with 10% ignore armor less. But the health is gonna be the same. So it's very comparable to the light spear, but it's using rather general damage more than the ignore armor part. So that makes it slightly different. But I'm still gonna say it is very, very powerful sword, especially for those more challenging quests, and especially when you consider quests where the enemy units have a lot of armor. And that's gonna be mainly the quest against Celts and the Romans. And like I said in the last video, that Norse as well, but let's be honest, Hardjars can be tanky, but they will not really kill your units. But units like Legionaries with their charge attack, or the Celtic Longswordsmen, and then their backlines, that's gonna be the big threat for your units. So I would not really worry about Norse that much. It is gonna be good, but it's gonna be like not necessary for you to deal with the Norse. But yeah, let's go. So Sword of the Piercing Frost, there are a lot of units where you can consider putting this on, and so we definitely will, I'll try to cover as many of them as possible if I'll remember them. As you could see, I don't remember everything out of my head. I completely forgot some units. But yeah, so let's go. As before, let's start with the first armor deck because 0 means it's useless. Let's go with the first tech, which is gonna be 1/5 of this, so 4%. Now let's multiply 4451. Okay, and we get 50.3%. I'm just gonna round it up. So 50.3% damage. That's very comparable at this point. If we start with the 0 though, let's start with the 0 armor. Okay, so this sword, where do we compare this? You can tell that health and damage, that's where you compare it with the Sword of Tiberius. And I kinda hate this comparison because Sword of Tiberius is overstated sword, and I'll just keep saying it's a very strong sword because of, let's be honest, that's a lot of stats from one item, namely the sword. It's been always dominating since it got released, so yeah, it's a very strong sword. If we compare these two, you can tell Tiberius is dominating for now. Okay, so for some easier, Tiberius is still gonna be more dominating. Then if we compare it to like Zack's sword, you can tell this is pretty okay comparison. Like damage wise, less damage, but you are getting good health. And I'll be honest, if I just got the health and damage portion of this, I could imagine this as the legendary version of the Osiris's Golden Blade. Maybe with slightly more health. And that's what I would imagine Tiberius to be like. Let's say I don't know, like around this damage value, but let's say like, I don't know, like 17-18% health. That's what I would imagine Tiberius or Tiberius. But it is what it is. So it is definitely a better version of the Osiris's Golden Blade. So that's already really good. If we compare it somewhere else, like Sword of Menace, you can see much lower damage, but you get health. So it's definitely, in comparison to the other swords, more defensive with okay damage. Okay, but now let's go. First tier, this is where it's becoming more interesting, because now it deals more damage than what Tiberius offers. So definitely it's getting somewhere, but it's still not as comparable to the other damage swords, right? Because definitely lower damage, lower damage, lower damage, lower damage, right? And lower damage here from the Zahak. But you have to remember, with this, you're also getting the health. So I would say it's already comparable to pretty much any sword except to Tiberius. Tiberius is still very strong sword with its stats. But yeah, it's already getting some good health and some generally good stats. So that was the first armory text. Now let's move on to the second tier armory text. Multiplying this by 20 times now 1.4451. Damn it, wrong value. What am I doing? You are going. Can I get this? No. Okay, let's do that again. I messed up. 3 divided by 7 times 0.2 plus 1. That's what I forgot. Times 1.4451. Okay. Okay. So almost 57% damage. Now this is where we already can see very good damage value. So if we compare this Zahak sword, we are already having better stats here. If we compare Sword of Menace, we definitely have better stats here, like higher damage, and even the defensive stat is much better. Now Psychosaurus is still ahead with its damage, but you can already tell because of its health, it's definitely better than Psychosaurus with its stats. So already the second tier again is much better for the Sword of the Piercing Frost than pretty much any other sword. And Gladius of Bellerophon is already like below Psychosaurus, so we don't really have to compare it there. And Council Overseer is more specialized, same as the Ishtar sword, so we don't really have to look at those, but you can tell that this is gonna be anti-infantry, but the Piercing Frost is much better in general. Ishtar is gonna be against ranged and pierce damage dealers with its bonus damage and the pierce armor. Whereas the Piercing Frost, hey, again, more general idea. So generally, with the second tier of armor attacks, and not only that, remember the units with their base armor as well. This sword is already, I would say, better than any other sword in general, like the more general swords than just the specialized swords. So this is already really good for the sword, and that's again where I feel like this sword is very strong. Like with the second tiers, it's already better than any other sword. And we haven't even got to the last one, which is 2/3 times 0.2 plus 1. So that's the third tier, or 0.40 armor, times, and this is, okay, 1.4451, okay. And here you can tell, 64% almost 64% extra damage in that case. And you have to remember, you can put this on units such as Hippospist. And if you find, let's say, Egyptian infantry and they have the first tier of upgrades for their armor, this is what you're getting, 64% damage there. That's bigger than what the Psychosaurus offers. You can see that this sword, I mean, okay, late game, this is fine. This is fine, but when you consider the units that you're fighting early and they get the first armor tech, You're doing more than 60% extra damage to them with this weapon, which is more than what the Celeste offers. This is where I find it very insane, because when you consider all the saves, usually there are 2 units with let's say infantry armor. So, for example, Egyptians, you have the spearmen and axemen, and those you see a lot. So suddenly, when you put this on Hypaspist, and they get the first armor tech, even with no armor tech, you could see it was already better than any other sword. They get the first armor tech. It's better than Sesostris. So much better. Because you're still getting the health. And now we can go on and on with all the extra armor. So this sword is definitely a strong weapon. And my issue with this sword is because it works against those early units, because they get they have the base infantry armor usually. So this sword is very good. It's very powerful, and I feel like it needs some nerf. I don't think it's needed like in the matter of damage, but the Igno armor I feel like is too huge. And to be honest, I would see this like 12%. 12 to 15%, okay. I could go like up to 15%, but I feel like 12% would be more than enough. That's my opinion, because this is already a huge number. And we are not even talking about the case where we fight the legionaries. This is in case you're fighting legionaries. And it's not only legionaries. Imagine the Celtic champions, longswordsmen with their upgrades. That's a huge amount of damage you're getting. And just so you know, it's not so far off from the Consul Overseer sword, which is supposed to be specialized against infantry. So you can tell, you can see why I was saying that this sword is especially good for the Roman and Celtic quests, because those units there get a lot of armor against infantry. So if you put this sword on Hypaspis, longswordsmen, legionaries, this is the extra damage you're getting. This is the value. You're like 3.5% off from the specialized sword. And that's just the 0.50. That's not even them getting armory upgrades. That's just the base armor. Except the longswordsman, obviously. And also, we cannot forget, Norse have the armor values there as well, because you have the spearmen, you have the hard jars, which also get their champion upgrade, and berserks. So this is why I was saying that this sword is especially good for the Romans, against the Romans, against Celts, and also against Norse. It's very, very powerful piece of gear for those quests, and this is why I'm seriously hating these values, because I feel like this is gonna make the defense against those civs in the early game so much easier because of these numbers. Like, look at this, like 73% extra damage against legionaries, when the highest general damage here is 60%, or with this you're just 3% off. And you have to remember, you're getting health as well. This sword is seriously OP in those quests. So this is why I'm gonna recommend get those swords for your infantry units. So now, yes, let's talk about the recommendations. Let's start with the Greeks. So Greeks have, you could also include scouts, but scouts, let's be honest, you use scouts, if you fight with your scouts, you don't use them for the damage, you use them for their health, because they can soak a lot of damage. Otherwise, you're fighting huntables, and those have no armor. So scouts are out of the question already, okay? Let's ignore all the scouts. So for Greeks, Hippaspists. Obviously, anti-infantry unit. So if you are fighting like Celts, you're fighting Romans, you want to train Hippaspists. Why? Because they counter infantry. With this sword, damn right, you're gonna counter the legionaries and longswordsmen and champions. It's gonna be really easy for you to counter them now. And believe me, I tried this in the Saturnalia Winter Quest, where you fight the Romans, and believe me, that damage, I saw it and I was like, man, this is insane. It's huge. So I can definitely recommend Hippaspists. If you, like I said, Romans, Celts, if you're fighting against them, very good sword for Hippaspists. Greeks have another unit, which is the Hippikon, and just like with the light spear, I have issue for the cavalry units, because there's not that many units that actually have the cavalry armor, because the only unit is the spearman, and then maybe some anti-cavalry unit. But usually the values are not that high, so if I had to say, against spearmen, I would not really care if we talk about the Hippikons. The Hippikons can take some extra damage from spearmen if you have the right build, obviously. If you use something like Lohrasp, if you use the adaptation Norse Milestone, then like you don't really have to worry about the spearman. So I would really worry about the enemy cavalry, anti-cavalry, and that's gonna be it. But you don't see them often, and if it's gonna be like Prodromos does not have that huge health, so I'm not really worried about the Prodromos. Norse Horsemen, yes, that is one scary unit, but I would not really go with cavalry against Norse, to be honest, because of the Horsemen. And then you have the Romans. Ekes is not that scary, to be honest, and if you check the gear in Legendary Quest, they are not like super scary units. It's the Gallic Horsemen that are really scary, and those have the huge armor. So if you feel like countering Gallic Horsemen with your Hippikons, well, I wouldn't do that, but if you want to, you can. Okay, with this sword, it can work there. But I don't think you really want to get it for your Hippikons. Definitely get it for your Hippaspists. At least one sword should be more than enough. Remember to get one for each Sith, just to be sure. If you feel like trying some weird builds with, let's say, cavalry units, then just so you have the option. Now, that was Greeks, okay? So definitely Hippaspists. Great choice. Moving on, Egyptians. Egyptians have no unit using swords, so we skip that. Sith. Moving on, Celts. Now here we have the longswordsmen and the champions. And I've tried both of them. Both of them are very good units for that. And just like with the Hippaspists, biggest enemies will be the Celts and the Romans. And Norse if you feel like it, but again, I don't really feel like you need it against Norse that much. And to be honest, when I was making the video about the Celtic gear, I was complaining about champions. Like, I feel like they're good, but I feel like I'm missing some gear. So I would rather change the gear a little bit so they become somewhat better, because I feel like I have good damage, but it did not feel ideal at all. With this sword, I feel like I can use my champions against the Romans. like overall, like I can use champions against Romans, because when I tried champions against Romans, it felt bad because you fight the legionaries. You're not able to kill them fast enough because of their huge armor. And it's very annoying because you need to get through them to reach the enemy siege, which counter your champions. So like going with champions against Romans was really bad idea. With this sword, I can see this being different. So suddenly it changes the whole game, and suddenly the champions can go against the Roman legionaries. And you have to remember, the ignore armor is applied on the splash damage. It is applied, so with the champion splash damage, it is even better. And longswordsman, let's just say it's the same as Hippospitz. You want to defend against the legionaries early, for example, it's a good sword. You want to use the longswordsman as your main unit in the late game, it is a good sword. So both of these units are very good. Again, I'm gonna say get at least one, so you can switch it around if you need to. But I can totally recommend getting this sword for your Celts. Moving on. Next one are the Persians. And here we have 2 units again. Asabaras first. This is gonna be the same case as with Hippicons, so I don't think there's anything else to be mentioned. Asabaras are literally Hippicons, okay? They're just faster, cheaper, but also slightly weaker. But Asabaras, pretty much what I said about the Hippicons. Now, the other unit, which would be the Immortal, and I'll be honest, I tried it, and I did not really feel like it's that good for Immortals. Now, why? I'm not saying like it was completely bad, but it did not feel like that I needed a sword that much. You have to remember, Immortals have 2 damage types. The melee infantry damage, which is their melee attack, and then the pierce damage from the ranged attack. And Immortals are slightly complicated unit because you cannot tell that you want to use them for melee attacks or ranged attacks and just attack move them into the enemy armies. No, to use the melee attack, you need to get them close enough to the unit so they will start attacking with melee attacks. If they are attacking from distance, well, the enemy unit is still far away for the Immortal to attack with melee attacks. But why am I saying this? Usually when you are fighting something that has huge pierce armor, then you want your Immortals to get into melee range, because how many units actually have this huge pierce armor while also having huge infantry armor? There's practically no unit. Not in Legendary Quest, if you ask me. If it was like PvP and we had the advisors, milestones, and everything available, then yes, it would be different story. But when we consider normal Legendary Quest, units that have huge pierce armor are usually siege units, and only rams have like the melee armor. And even in that scenario, that melee armor is not that huge. You can destroy those with Immortals. So I don't think you really want it there that much. And you have to remember, you can also put the piercing frost arrows on your Immortals. So I feel like, okay, I can go this, I can go both, I can go one, but I feel like you don't really want to overkill with the ignore armor, because let's just say if you are like 20%, it's already good enough. But if you get another 20%, it's not gonna have the same value as the first 20%. It's gonna be slightly worse. It's gonna be good, but it's not gonna be as effective as the first numbers. That's what I'm trying to say. So if I were to say, you can use this sword, but then I'm gonna say use different arrows than the piercing frost, because like, let's be honest, 20% for your ranged attack is huge already. So if the unit is resilient against pierce damage, then the ignore armor from the sword is gonna be more than enough to kill that unit. Believe me, it's gonna be good, more than enough. And if you're fighting with low pierce armor, you're just gonna kill it with pierce damage. Who cares, right? So it's gonna be already good. So if I had to say, you can go with the sword, but I would not combine it with the piercing frost arrows. I would suggest going with something else. Either go pure damage, which I would say kind of makes sense. Just go pure damage, or you can go the Germanicus for some extra health. I mean, it's up to you. What do you want to do with your Immortals? It's just my recommendation, okay? Either go Sword of the Piercing Frost and some non-piercing frost arrows, or go piercing frost arrows and then some different sword. It's all up to you, but I wouldn't recommend combining it. I feel like that's overkill. And definitely do not combine it with Kavek. That's even bigger overkill. Goddamn, don't do that. Just pick Esfandia. Don't pick Kavek. And if you decide to pick Kavek, then don't pick the piercing frost gear at all. It's a waste. God dang it. Okay, Immortals, okay units to use, but don't overdo it with the Igno armor. Let's move on. So, Romans. And Romans here have a lot of units, namely the Legionaries and all of the officer units. So, let's start with the officer units. So, we have the Curians, same thing as with Hippicans. The Curians are like the early Hippicans, so whatever I said about Hippicans, same applies here. Centurions now. For Centurions, someone was like, I want to put this on Centurions. I'm like, no. Don't do it. Don't do it, you idiot. Why would you do it? Those Centurions get goddamn 60% Igno armor from their champion upgrade. Why would you need another 20%? And believe me, I tried calculating how effective it would be. And the enemy unit would need like 0.75 armor. So the 20% Igno armor here is equal to the 20% damage increase. I think it was around that number when I was calculating it. Which is a lot of armor, and there's practically no unit reaching that number, except with like boss units. But like normal units, there is not. It's just huge overkill. Don't do it on Centurions. You don't need it. Just if you want damage, go pick the Bellerophon and hope for the crit. Go with Psychosaurus for the pure damage. Go Tiberius for some extra health, or Zahak for extra health regen. Centurions get pretty good armor, and if you combine them with Zach's swords and put them together with Clinicus, that's a lot of healing. They will last for a very long amount of time. But do not put the piercing frost on Centurions. It's an overkill. You don't need it. And then we have Aquilifers. Aquilifers are not usually the main fighting unit. You usually want them to stand behind, so they apply their damage buff aura. Same goes for the Primus Pilus. You don't really want them to fight. You want them rather to stand behind and buff or debuff the units. So not really units where you will want to put the piercing frost. So again, all the officer units, I would not recommend it, especially not Centurions. Do not put it on Centurions. It's an overkill, not worth it. Now, let's go for the Legionaries. Now, for Legionaries, we all know we got the Caesar Advisor, which gives 25% Igno armor. And if we put this, obviously, we'll get 45%. Remember, Igno armor is actually one of those exception stats which actually stacks additively and not multiplicatively. So if I get 20% and 20%, I'll get 40%. So with Caesar and the sword, you'll have 45%, which is really good. But I'll be honest, I would not really put this sword on Legionaries if I'm going with Caesar. If I put this sword on Legionaries, I'm going with Pompey. And I'm not joking. Let's go with the goddamn Pompey. Why would I need some extra Igno armor with Caesar? If I can use this sword with Pompey, I get extra damage with Pompey. And the extra damage is actually applied together with the Igno armor. And now when I charge, the 10% is there. Whereas the Igno armor is depending on the enemy armor. So if I charge against low armor targets, guess what? Pompey gives me the extra damage. I'll do more damage. If I'm charging against the heavily armored unit like Legionary, That's where the Piercing Frost really helps. So this is my idea. If I'm going Piercing Frost on Legionaries, I want to put it together with Pompey, not Caesar. And I'll be honest, like, people are underestimating Pompey. Pompey is really good. And not only for cavalry builds, you should try him. Like, seriously, try Pompey once in a while instead of Caesar. Like, I know Caesar is good, but it's not like, hey, I would use him everywhere. Let's be honest, Pompey is also very good. So try Legionaries with Pompey. But yes, I can recommend this on Legionaries. And now moving on, we have the Babylonians and their Royal Guards. And obviously Royal Guards, super great for the late game. Now my issue with them is if I lose the health from the Sword of Tiberius, I wanna get it somewhere else, because I'll keep saying it, those Royal Guards, they don't have that great health. They will be dying quite fast, even with all the bonus damage protection. If you don't help them with their health, you'll be losing them a lot. And if you're losing them a lot, that's a huge economy you will need to keep the production up and running, because those units are not cheap at all. So unless you have huge discounts on them, yes, you will want some extra health to keep them alive for as long as possible, so you don't have to keep replacing them every 2 seconds. Okay, it is a good sword, definitely, but because I was using the Tiberius on my Royal Guards, I decided to use some other piece of gear as well, so I compensate for the loss of the health. So I've tried the summer event medium armor, and I was quite happy because they were still around 1000 health, so that was very good. Sure, I don't have that huge damage as with Alexander, but let's be honest, I get 20% ignore armor. With that, I'm like pretty much at the same level once they get the second tier. Or if I'm fighting the Romans, who cares? Who cares? Right? If I lose the damage, it's gonna work the same way no matter what. And the higher they go, yes, the better the Royal Guards will be. So yes, I can recommend the Royal Guards, but make sure you have more than enough health, or make them as cheap as possible. That's the other way. Last but not the last save, but not the least, are gonna be the Raiders. And that's gonna be pretty much the same as Hippicons, although Raiders are faster and there's gonna be a lot more of them. But you have to remember, one of the biggest weaknesses for Raiders are the enemy walls. And Piercing Frost definitely does not help your Raiders to destroy walls. So here I would stick with Tiberius. But if you are fighting mainly units, then yes, okay, you can try Piercing Frost as well. With the crit damage you get from their advisor, I mean, that can be a lot of damage against enemy spearmen. But like I said, it's gonna be mainly against spearmen. So I wouldn't say, hey, you need to get it on Raiders. It can be okay, just like for Hippicons, Asabaras. But I wouldn't recommend it like to get it 100%. Like that it's must have on your Raiders. Definitely not. It can be okay, sort, but I would prefer the Tiberius. And then the last one would be the Indians. And for Indians, it's a little bit harder because we don't have them available yet. But there is gonna be one unit, the Juggernaut, that actually uses a sword. And you could see it if you were checking the block for the winter event. There was this Juggernaut unit. It is supposed to be like this very big elephant. Now, because I don't really have the stats available to me, I cannot tell how good the sword is gonna be. So I am gonna recommend getting one sword for them, but I don't really know if it's gonna be really good. But from what I know, it's supposed to be like this bigger war elephant like unit. So if it's gonna be like war elephant, then yes, it's gonna be as with the light spear for your elephants. So it's gonna be good for them if you're fighting the enemy armies, but you will be training a little bit of the damage against the buildings. So it can be really good there. But I don't really want to say it's guaranteed because I don't know what the final stats will be for that unit. So there's that. Now I hope you saw how good the sword actually is, how good the light speed actually is. Just to recapture it, basically once you see the second tier of armor attacks or some of those units with their base 0.30 armor, those two pieces of item are already really strong in comparison to all of the other weapons of their type. So yes, very strong weapons. I can definitely recommend getting them, but obviously it depends on the quest you're playing how good these items will be. You heard my recommendations, so definitely get one per civ where you need it. Definitely you don't need a sword for your Egyptians, so don't really need it there. You don't need light spear for your Celts. So yeah, get it where you can use it, at least one for the civ. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please press the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe to the channel. Tell me how much do you agree with me. Is the buffed light spear really strong as I'm saying? Is the sword very powerful as it is as I'm saying? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please leave a comment. And I'll see you next time. Bye.